There was a day when the words almost left your mouth. They were ready. You could feel them forming, rising slowly from the place where hurt begins. It was not a loud hurt, not the kind that breaks things. It was small, almost invisible, but it was sharp, the kind that sits quietly in the chest and waits. They had spoken. Perhaps not with anger, perhaps not even with cruelty, but something in their tone carried dismissal, a lightness, as if what you felt did not matter, as if your presence could be overlooked without consequence. You felt it. Your heart reacted first, a quick tightening, a warmth in your face, the sudden urge to correct them, to defend yourself, to explain, to make them see what they could not see. Isn't that what we all want in moments like this? To be understood? For a brief second, the silence between you and them felt heavy. Too heavy. It asked to be filled. Words would have been easy. Words would have felt powerful. But something else happened. You paused. It was not a long pause, only a breath. But in that breath, something shifted. You noticed the feeling instead of becoming it. You watched the hurt rise like a wave, and instead of letting it crash through your voice, you allowed it to pass through your chest. Why? Maybe you were tired of explaining yourself. Maybe you were tired of proving your worth. Or maybe, deep inside, you began to sense that not every misunderstanding deserves your energy. They looked at you, waiting, perhaps expecting resistance, perhaps expecting a reaction, but you did not give them one. You simply listened. Listening is strange. It feels passive. It feels like surrender. Yet in that moment, it required more strength than speaking would have. Because speaking would have been immediate. Speaking would have satisfied the ego. Silence required restraint. You noticed your own breathing. You felt the urge to interrupt, to say that is not true, to say you are wrong. But instead, you allowed the moment to exist without correcting it. And something quiet began to grow inside you. You realized that their words, however sharp, were only reflections of their own understanding. Their view of you did not change who you were. Their misunderstanding did not rewrite your truth. Still, the discomfort remained. It is not easy to be misread. It is not easy to feel unseen. There is a loneliness in that space, a subtle ache that whispers, "Speak. Defend yourself. Do not let this stand." But what if standing still is also a form of strength? You felt the tension in your hands slowly soften. The heat in your face began to fade. The storm that was ready to rise lost its power when you refused to feed it. Silence in that moment was not emptiness, it was control. You were not silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because you chose not to spend yourself on something that did not deserve you. There is a difference. They may have interpreted your quiet in many ways. Perhaps they thought you agreed. Perhaps they thought you had no response. Perhaps they believed they had won something. But inside you, something deeper was happening. You were learning the space between feeling and reacting. You were discovering that you do not have to chase every misunderstanding. That your dignity does not depend on being defended at every turn. That sometimes the strongest answer is the one that remains unspoken. The room felt still after that. The conversation moved on. The moment passed, yet within you a quiet awareness stayed. You had faced the small sting of dismissal, and you had not allowed it to define you. You had felt the pull of reaction, and you had gently stepped back. And in that gentle stepping back, a seed was planted, a seed of inner power, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. After that day, something changed in the way they looked at you. They noticed your silence, but they did not understand it. In their eyes, quietness was weakness. They believed that strength must be loud, that confidence must defend itself quickly, that power must interrupt, and because you did none of these things, they began to draw their own conclusions. They spoke over you more easily. They explained you to yourself. They filled the empty spaces with their own meanings. And you felt it, not as anger, but as a quiet ache, Have you ever been misunderstood and felt too tired to correct it? There's a special kind of loneliness in that experience. You stand there, present in your own truth, yet invisible in their perception. They think they see you clearly, but what they see is only a shadow shaped by their own thoughts. At times the old urge returned, the desire to say, "You do not know me." The desire to list your reasons, your strengths, your boundaries. The desire to defend the quiet dignity you were beginning to protect. But something inside you had already shifted. You began to notice how quickly people label what they do not understand. Silence becomes weakness. Patience becomes insecurity. Kindness becomes softness. And restraint becomes fear. It would have been easy to react, to raise your voice just enough to change their opinion, to show a sharper side of yourself so they would step back. But then you asked yourself, softly, would that truly bring respect, or would it only create more noise? You watched them speak with certainty about things they did not fully see. You watched them interpret your calm as emptiness. And sometimes, yes, it hurt, because being misunderstood touches something deep. It touches the human need to be seen as we are. Yet slowly, you began to observe something else. Their judgment said more about their comfort with silence than about your character. Their discomfort with your calm revealed their need for reaction. They were not attacking your strength. They simply did not recognize it. And why would they? True strength does not announce itself. It does not seek approval. It does not rush to correct every false idea. It stands quietly, even when unseen. Still, there were nights when you replayed their words in your mind, moments when doubt tried to enter. You wondered, maybe they are right, maybe I should speak more, maybe I should push back. But when you looked deeper, you saw something clear. Your silence was not fear. You were not shrinking, you were choosing. Choosing not to react does not mean you have no fire. It means you have learned how to hold it without burning everything around you. And so, you allowed them to think what they wished. You let them believe your calm was emptiness. You let them underestimate the depth of your thoughts. You let them speak loudly into spaces you could have filled. There is a strange freedom in that. When you stop trying to control how others see you, a weight lifts. You realize that their understanding is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is only to remain aligned with your own truth. And your truth did not require noise. It required steadiness. They may never know the effort it took for you to remain quiet. They may never see the discipline behind your restraint. They may continue to misread you, but slowly their opinions began to lose their power because you discovered something gentle yet unshakable. Being misunderstood does not reduce your worth. Silence does not erase your presence, and strength, real strength, does not need to be explained to be real. You sat with this realization quietly, like a small flame protected from the wind. They spoke, you listened, they assumed, you remained, and in that remaining you were not small. You were becoming something steady, something inwardly strong, even if they could not see it. There came a quiet understanding, not all at once, but slowly. It did not arrive like a sudden light. It felt more like dawn, soft, gradual, almost unnoticed at first. You began to see your silence differently. Before, it felt like something you had to defend, something you carried carefully, unsure if it would be mistaken for weakness. But now, you started to recognize it as something chosen, something deliberate. Not reacting had become a discipline. You noticed how emotions rise, how they move through the body like weather, a comment, a tone, a look, and inside, a wave begins to form, quick, powerful, demanding expression. But you had learned to watch the wave. You did not deny it. You did not pretend it was not there. You simply allowed it to pass without turning it into action. Is that not a kind of strength? Anyone can release anger. Anyone can answer quickly. Anyone can match volume with volume. It takes very little effort to react, but to feel deeply and still remain steady, that requires something quieter. It requires self-awareness. You began to understand that silence is not empty space. It is a space you create between feeling and response. In that space, you are free, free from regret, free from words spoken too soon, free from becoming smaller than your own values. You remembered moments in the past when you reacted too quickly, when emotion led, and wisdom followed too late. Those moments often left a heavy feeling behind, not because you were wrong to feel, but because you allowed the feeling to control you. Now something was different. You were not suppressing yourself. You were mastering yourself. There is a difference. Suppression feels tight. It feels forced. It builds pressure inside. But discipline feels calm. It feels like holding something gently, not crushing it. When they spoke sharply, you felt the first spark, but you also felt your breath. You felt your feet on the ground. You felt the quiet center inside you that did not need to move. That center became familiar. It was not pride. It was not indifference. It was self-respect. You realize that not every invitation to argue deserves acceptance. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every opinion needs your reply. Some battles only reduce you, and slowly you began to value your inner peace more than temporary victory. They may have thought you were passive, but you knew better. You were observing. You were choosing. You were protecting something invisible yet precious. Your energy, your dignity, your sense of self. You began to notice how powerful it feels to remain composed when provoked, not because you are trying to impress anyone, but because you are aligned with yourself. There is a quiet satisfaction in that alignment. You no longer felt the urgent need to prove your depth. Depth does not shout. It does not rush to display itself. It exists calmly, like deep water beneath a still surface. And the deeper you went within yourself, the less you were shaken by what happened around you. This realization did not make you cold. It made you clear about what deserves your attention, clear about what deserves your silence, clear about who you are, even when they do not see it. The more you practiced this discipline, the lighter you felt. Arguments that once pulled you in no longer had the same grip. Words that once stung began to lose their sharpness, because you understood something simple and profound. You cannot control what they say, but you can control what you become in response. And you chose to become steady, not loud, not defensive, just steady. In that steadiness, you found a quiet power. A power that does not seek recognition, a power that does not need applause, a power that rests comfortably within itself. And perhaps for the first time, you realized silence was never your weakness. It was your strength, waiting to be understood. With time, something settled inside you. It was not a dramatic change. No one announced it. No one applauded it. But you could feel it, the way the air feels different after a long storm has finally passed. You were no longer waiting to be understood. There was a season when you hoped they would see you clearly, when you wished they would recognize your patience, your restraint, your quiet strength. A small part of you still wanted that acknowledgement, but slowly that need began to fade. You realized that peace does not ask to be witnessed. It simply exists. They continued to speak as they always had. Sometimes they still misunderstood you. Sometimes they still filled your silence with their own stories, but their voices no longer entered you the same way. Before, their words felt like stones thrown into your chest. Now, they felt like passing sounds in the distance. What changed? You stopped measuring yourself through their reactions. You stopped checking their faces for approval. You stopped explaining your calm. And in that stopping, you found rest. There is a deep relief in no longer trying to manage how others see you. It frees your energy. It returns you to yourself. You began to notice how quiet your mind had become. The endless replaying of conversations slowed. The imagined arguments faded. The need to correct every false impression dissolved like mist in morning light. In its place, there was space. Space to breathe, space to observe, space to simply be. You did not feel superior. You did not feel distant. You felt grounded. Your silence was no longer a shield you held tightly. It became your natural state, not because you feared speaking, but because you no longer felt threatened by misunderstanding. There is a quiet confidence in that. You understood that those who truly wish to know you will take the time, and those who do not will continue with their assumptions. Both are beyond your control, and for the first time that truth did not trouble you. You began to cherish your inner stillness. You protected it gently, the way one protects a small flame from the wind, not with tension, but with awareness. When conflict approached, you did not tense. You simply noticed it. You listened. You responded only if response felt aligned, and if silence felt right, you allowed it. There was no rush, no urgency, no need to prove that you were strong, because you knew the effort it took to hold back anger. You knew the discipline it took to remain steady. You knew the growth hidden inside your restraint. And that knowledge was enough. They may never fully understand the journey you walked within yourself. They may never see the battles you chose not to fight. But you do not need them to see it. Your peace is not a performance. It is a quiet agreement you made with yourself. An agreement to value dignity over impulse. An agreement to protect your energy. An agreement to let your actions speak gently without force. Now, when silence fills the space between you and them, it no longer feels heavy. It feels calm. It feels chosen. It feels strong. You sit with yourself comfortably. There is no noise. Inside asking to be released. No restless urge to defend. Just a steady awareness of who you are. And perhaps that is the greatest change of all. Not that they became different, but that you did. You no longer react to be heard. You no longer speak to be validated. You no longer shrink to be accepted. You simply remain quiet, steady, at peace within your own understanding. And in that quiet peace there is a strength that does not need to be seen to be real.